Merry readers, come cozy in. Let the story time begin with Robin and the Marys.
Hi Merry Readers! Today is September 21st and I'm so excited because that means that we get to delve into chapters 2 and 3 of A Discovery of Witches. These are a really exciting couple of chapters because we get to know Diana a little bit more and we get to meet a mysterious vampire finally. So I'm really excited to go through these. I've decided that because there are 2 chapters for this day, I'm actually going to just post 2 videos. That way, if you have not had a chance to read both chapters yet, you have some time to catch up and it just keeps things a little bit more clear. So the first chapter, chapter 2, is a little bit longer than chapter 3, so that video will probably be a bit longer, but I'm really excited to get into it. So in chapter 2, Diana is still recovering from her experience of touching and opening Ashmole 782. She tries to go about her daily life. She loves rowing. She loves to walk around Oxford, and so she tries to just do her normal routine, but something keeps pulling her back to the library. And so on the 21st, she goes to the library and she is sharing with the readers through her memories in her head a lot about how the 21st is important for witches because it is Mabon, and that she was invited to a couple of parties and she thought that the library would be pretty much empty because everyone would be out celebrating. So she goes to the library, she pulls out her usual books, she goes about her normal routine, and she's up in one of the balconies when all of a sudden she feels something shift in the air. And so she goes over and she looks down and she can physically feel tingling along her arms, and she starts to smell and taste a very strong smell of clove. And as she looks over the balcony, she sees below that there is a tall man, and she says that even though she's up in the balcony, she can tell he's tall, and right away she recognizes him as being a vampire because for her, she can always sense the supernatural beings and creatures around her, and she remarks that other witches, they can feel each other's magic, and with demons she gets a much duller sense, similar to the vampire, but it's just a lot more dull. But with vampires, she can usually feel death or something like that that's just very strong, and with this vampire, she gets a very strong smell of clove around him. And so she's looking over the balcony and she sees him and she remarks on his body and how he is so strong and yet lean, and he just has almost a supernatural beauty about him. So she stares at him a little bit too long and he looks up into the balcony and catches her eye, and she kind of panics in that moment, as many of us would do if you were staring at someone who you find to be a little bit on the handsome side but also intimidating. And so she tries to run down the stairs and get out of the library before he can catch up to her, but of course vampires are very fast, so he meets her at the bottom of the stairs. He introduces himself as Matthew Clairmont, and she starts to introduce herself and he tells her that he knows who she is, he loves her books, he's currently in the middle of reading her most recent book, and that he really admires the work that she's been doing. And so Diana finds this very strange because she also knows who he is and knows that he's a scientist, and so she's not sure why he's interested in what she's doing. But after he compliments her on her work, he goes on to say that he would really love to take her out for dinner and he would like to get to know her a little bit more and talk about her research and everything. And Diana kind of panics and she knows she doesn't want to go out to dinner with a vampire because she starts to have all these thoughts about what a vampire might do to her when they go out to dinner and things like that. And so she decides to just kind of blow him off. And so she goes over to Sean, who's there at the collection desk, and she returns her books. Sean asks her if she'll be back the next day and she says yes, and he puts the books aside for her, and then she runs out of the Bodleian. Basically, she doesn't actually run, but the description is that she is moving as quickly as she possibly can without drawing attention to her. Now, the other thing I want to mention that I forgot to mention at the beginning of this is that ever since she opened Ashmole 782, there have been a lot more creatures just coming around. So she noticed an influx in demons around, in witches around, and so there was definitely some kind of beacon that went off of the book when she opened it. So she rushes out of the Bodleian and she goes through the streets, and it's getting dark out, and she starts to just give the reader a little taste of her surroundings. She remarks at the old buildings as she's passing them. She talks about the beautiful garden that's a medieval garden that's in the courtyard of her building, and she talks about how going up into her building, she was given one of the student accommodations, but her accommodation is definitely for more prestigious students than just your average student going to Oxford. And so it's at the top of her building, and she has to go up a flight of stairs or two, and then she talks about how her flat has a bedroom, a really lovely sitting room, and a kitchen. And so she goes in, she locks the door, she opens her window, and she just tries to relax. She pours herself a cup of tea, and she has some snacks, and she goes to bed. But she has a really weird night's sleep. She sleeps through the night, but in the morning she wakes up with a really strong taste of clove in her mouth, and she decides to call her aunts. And so she gets on the phone with her aunts, and her Aunt Sarah answers the phone right away and is immediately like, "What's wrong? We've been having visions of you being lost in the woods. We're seeing you surrounded by a vampire. What is going on?" And so Diana explains everything that's happened in the last couple of days, and her Aunt Sarah's partner, Emily, and they call her M, gets on the phone and immediately starts telling Diana she needs to be careful of this vampire, she's getting bad vibes off of this vampire, and that she needs to basically figure out a way to get him to leave her alone. And so Diana is like, "Oh, it's no problem, you know how it is, sometimes creatures follow me, this has happened before, I can handle myself." And M basically says, "No, you know I can see the future, I see death and just bad things, you need to leave him alone, he needs to go away." And so that is where chapter 2 ends. So just like with chapter 1, I'm going to go through a couple of things. I wrote some notes down of some topics that I wanted to discuss. So the first one is the setting. We're in the Bodleian again for most of the first half of this chapter, and we get to have a little bit of a different perspective because she's up in one of the balconies and looking down, and then after that she's walking through the streets of Oxford to her flat, and we get to hear a little bit about what her flat is like. So that is the setting for this chapter. The characters, it's really just Sean a little bit. She mentions Gillian, but we don't actually see Gillian in the chapter. And she mentions that there's some other creatures about, but we don't really know quite what she means by that. And then, of course, Matthew Clairmont, the vampire. So those are the only characters. This is a very heavy Diana in her head chapter where she's mostly talking to herself and just briefly talking to Sean or Matthew. So, and then she's of course on the phone with her aunts. So we meet Sarah over the phone and M over the phone, and so we get to know a little bit more about her aunts, and we get to hear a little bit about their concerns about her because it's very clear that they are concerned for her safety. The historical and academic Easter eggs. So rowing, of course, is a big Oxford tradition. There's a rowing team there that is very well known, and so that was just a little piece. And Diana loves to row. That's something about her character that's just very well known. Honestly, beyond that, it's just a medieval garden in the middle of where she's staying. That's well known that they made medieval gardens for students back in the day so that they could contemplate life and God and their studies and have something beautiful to look at. So that's another piece. So, and then of course there's just the Bodleian in general. And it's such a beautiful library and it's iconic to look at. So the balconies are also such a beautiful architectural feature. So if you're able to look up a picture, that's really great because they are really cool. Deborah Harkness actually put out a real-time reread guide, and in that she shares a picture of exactly where Diana would have been looking down at Matthew. So I will put that here briefly just so that you can get an idea of what it would look like. And if I can find any pictures of the medieval gardens, I will also briefly put those here for you. So the magic, of course, is that Diana can sense other creatures. She has this ability to know right away when a supernatural creature enters her vicinity, and so I thought that was pretty cool. And then there's, of course, her aunts who sensed when she was calling, they knew it was her right away. They could physically see what she was doing actually as the call went on. Em was able to tap in so much that she could see that Diana was fidgeting with a blanket and told her to stop. So there's a lot of magic that was tapped into in this chapter as well. The mood and tone, there was a bit of an uneasy undertone of this chapter where Diana is feeling watched. She's feeling like whatever happened with Ashmole 782 sent out a beacon to other creatures, and so there is this uneasy energy about this chapter. And the symbols and details and things, when Diana and Matthew look at each other, they have a long gaze, and Diana immediately feels uncomfortable, as if Matthew is staring into her soul, and she says she feels like he can read her, and that was uncomfortable for her too. So that's just a little detail. Food and drink, we get to hear about Diana's snacks and her tea when she returns to her room. It was a nice little cozy way to end a unsettling adventure that she had out to the Bodleian. The overall vibe and chapter strength, I think that this was a really great chapter to follow up the first one, because the tension is just building in this one. You don't know much yet still, and yet you're learning so much with every sentence and word that Deborah Harkness shares with you. We know so much about Diana's character, and yet we still really know nothing at all, and so that's an interesting place to be as the reader. And we get to know about this mysterious vampire who is this world-known scientist, and he's interested in Diana and her research for some reason, and so that's a really interesting little part too. Foreshadowing, I think that we can guess that somehow Matthew is going to tie into all of what's happening with Diana and this manuscript and the magic and everything like that, so I think there's a little bit of foreshadowing there. And I think that the festivities and Diana, again, turning her back on the magical world when they're all celebrating what some call pagan Thanksgiving, which is Mabon, and she is deciding to go to the library. I think that there's a little bit of foreshadowing there of she made a decision to turn her back on her magical community, and it put her in danger. So there's a little bit of foreshadowing there as well. And yeah, I think that the romance is just really, there's this tension that we definitely felt with Matthew. We don't know yet whether he will be a romantic interest, if he is the bad guy in this story, whether he's safe, dangerous, we really don't know, but there was definitely some tension between the two of them there. So the question that I'll leave for you with this chapter will be, would you keep going about your life if you felt eyes on you everywhere, or would you confront it head on? And so with that, I hope that you enjoyed chapter 2. Please go on ahead to my video of chapter 3. It is live now as well, and we can continue the conversation there. Hope you have a good one, and see you soon.
So many readers, close your eyes. Let the stories lift and rise. Till next time, when lights will gleam